From the Drop the Charges campaign to the dueling op-eds in the Hamilton Spectator, there is so much that I could say about what seems to be the deteriorating relationship between the police, the mayor, and Hamilton's racialized community. But after hearing what our guests today, Sarah Jama and Dr. Ameil Joseph, have to say about all of it, let's go right to them. Welcome back to the OShow. I'm Laura Babcock. And if you're enjoying the content that we're bringing to you with Hamilton's Current Affairs program, please make sure that you like and subscribe on YouTube and subscribe to our audio podcast as well. And that way we can make sure to keep bringing you the content and getting it to you as soon as we post it. I want to get right to Sarah. Sarah, can you tell me what your response was to all of these op-eds, starting with the first one, which was from Kojo, where he talked about, of course, the fact that, in his opinion, the mayor has been failing racialized Hamiltonians.
The interesting thing about what Kojo wrote is that he really, off the start of the article, pointed out the double-sided face of the mayor and the fact that he could talk about anti-Black racism during the election with his whole chest, and then at Freedom Camp and every time afterward denies that we have a problem with racism in policing. And it goes to show just how far people are willing to go to get elected. But those of us who are pointing out actual systemic issues, who worked with community members to point out numbers and facts and issues with the surplus and asked for money to be redirected, we are the ones framed as ideological. But the mayor is the one who's ideological because he got the numbers wrong. He's speaking about anti-racism in a way that he doesn't understand, and it's not based on any fact or numbers. And Cameron pointed that out, rightfully so. The mayor tried to argue that, the police budget increased only by inflation, which is completely not true. And it's exactly what those of us without PhDs, without master's degrees, have tried to sit down and break down ourselves since 2020, right? To try to show that we are not ideological only, that we actually took a look at these numbers and said, hey, this money can be redirected toward other issues. And then Councillor Nan moved a motion to say, let's redirect some of these funds toward the harder issues and homelessness in our communities. But ideologically, the mayor continues to say no and continues to put his foot down. And he really showed himself as someone who's not based in fact when he, when Cameron pointed out that his numbers were wrong. And I find it interesting that Cameron is not allowed to go out and talk about Sewergate as chair of an advisory committee and other issues that he believes in and can be penalized. But when the mayor goes out and says these actual wrong pieces of information to the public, something that he should know about, he's not penalized at all. He's not investigated. People don't really bat an eye. And it goes to show that those of us who are out here trying to crunch numbers, also trying to feed people and support people, are not just ideological. We're not just radical. It is the mayor and all these people who refuse to educate themselves and to learn about the issues at hand in front of them that are ideological. And refuse to grow and refuse to learn about what it is we're asking for. Because it's not rocket science, right? We just want to be able to say, people are being over-policed for being houseless, for being racialized, for existing in our city. How do we take the money that's not being used, the surplus, and redirect it in ways that could be helpful?
So Ameil, what was your response to the mayor's op-ed? Because it was a little bit different than Sarah's, and also to Cameron's response as well.
Well, Kojo makes an important set of points again and again that are made in Hamilton, and that is the city's inadequate responses and resourcing of to racism and initiatives that respond to racism. We have known for many years the degree of or the severity of the problem of racism in Hamilton. And there has been, even from the mayor himself, an acknowledgement of systemic racism. And that public acknowledgement has, in practice, been rescinded time and time and again. He chooses to talk about or to respond to leaders in our community who have been working on issues of racism and responding to them for years, with denials, omissions, and resistance or gaslighting, really. You know, how does one claim to be improving relationships on racism with Black and other racialized folks in the Hamilton community by saying to a Black leader who works on racism in the community that they are lying to them, or that they're lying to us somehow, when they're outlining the very stark realities of racism in Hamilton and the inadequate ways this city council and this mayor has responded to them. It was infuriating, to say the least.
Yeah, tone deaf at the very least, but he's no political naive newbie, right? This is his third time as mayor, his third term. And to put out an op-ed that is factually inaccurate, I just think is below the office. You know, even if it, whatever the issue, I think it's below the office to assert facts that are incorrect in a publication. And, but to specifically, as you point out, go after Kojo by name in the op-ed. And then claim that, you know, there's a building up of the relationship. Many people responded by saying, well, if you're two people and if there's a two-sided conflict, one of you doesn't get to declare that the conflict has been, you know, ameliorated or resolved. And I just have to say that what got to me in the op-ed was when he quoted Kojo saying, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, and said, well, as mayor, I won't succumb to that, you know? And I thought, what? How can you say that to like Kojo?
The phrase sick and tired of being sick and tired has like extreme historical context. So I think it went really over his head. It's terminology used by freedom fighters. So yeah, I don't think he's doing the bare minimum. I think that he's only comfortable talking about issues that he understands, but there's a wall when he gets pushed to go past his understanding and limitations. But we don't have time for this. We're sick and tired because we're running out of time. It was minus 30 degrees a couple nights ago, and only 2 warming centers were open. The Hub, which is run by community, and one of the recreation centers run by the city, was open 24 hours. People were burning hand sanitizer to stay warm. We already had a fire at Beamer, which caused a whole bunch of, you know, other issues and people losing their belongings. But this is happening because people will die in the cold. People have died in the cold. And I'm waiting to also hear about the numbers from a couple nights ago. But no doubt the city does have blood on its hands and lives lost to reckon with. But instead of dealing with these real issues, he's out here, you know, straining his ego even further to respond to one individual who had critiques around systemic racism instead of doing his job. And the truth is, he's in over his head and he doesn't know how to do his job. He doesn't know how to be creative, and he doesn't know how to look for solutions past his comfort zone. And that's the issue in terms of his leadership. He is failing because he's unwilling to challenge himself, let alone be challenged by community. He does not challenge himself. His ego is too big to listen. And I think people will continue to die and be harmed because of it. And that's not, I'm not saying that lightly. I'm saying that as someone who has seen that, who is tired of also seeing death, knowing people who have died and feeling like we can't do anything about it. We get framed as radical when we're at our wits' end. We don't like, I don't like being angry and frustrated. And I think neither does the mayor. But instead of talking about it or writing these op-eds, like we want to see him say, okay, I met with staff and we decided to open X amount of warming centers. We'll celebrate that. We will celebrate with him, but he's not even trying to meet people halfway or talk about the real issues or talk about the excessive use of force of his own officers. It's a potential that a potential officer may run for council. And so these issues are only going to get worse, right? And we need to be able to talk about this openly instead of egos getting in the way. And that's what I'm seeing from the mayor's response, to the extent that he missed a very important reference to a quote from a freedom fighter. It's just, it seems to be going over his head.
Dr. Gary Warner was on the OShow a few weeks back, and he's a friend of the mayor, and he's spoken to the mayor about these issues, and he said so on the program. And he said, you know, his advice to the mayor, council, and the police chief is to really listen to people with lived experience and to demonstrate that there's been listening. And to what Sarah is just describing, how can you possibly learn if you're not willing to listen, even to critics? And oftentimes the critics are on the front line. You know, they want a successful solution that saves lives. It's not just about criticizing a person's failings. It's about saying, we're not doing enough. And Sarah, you mentioned you're looking to see the numbers from the other night of people who might have perished because of being houseless. It's not just numbers for you, right? It's people you know. And these are real Hamiltonians, real people, not numbers, and they are at risk of death and they need more support. And, you know, I don't, of course, place that on the mayor as an individual responsible for all of it, or the weather or the pandemic or poverty. But when you have the top job, you're supposed to be doing everything in your power to remedy it and to protect Hamiltonians. And spending the time on an op-ed to go after Kojo and not even put out the facts accurately, instead of scrambling to open up other warming centers, you know, I think it's disgusting. And we need a fresh mayor. I just don't know after 3 terms if he doesn't get it yet, Dr. Joseph, and if he's not listening to his friends, presumably advice like Dr. Warner, then is there hope for this mayor? Or do we look at the election and say, you know, we need someone with a fresh perspective and fresh ideas to solve these problems?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a problem, an ongoing problem, a multi-year now problem with poor listening. It's not being responsive as a leader or responsible as a leader to heeding to the recommendations, the advice of experts and community leaders, of those with lived experience that serve and lead and respond to the most at risk and the most marginalized. You know, if I were mayor and Sarah Jama, the executive director of the Disability Justice Network of Ontario, asked to have a meeting with me regarding how we could think more accessibly around housing and housing responses in the city, and for me to deny that meeting, that alone should have been enough for the public to be outraged. And in my mind, you know, at least provoke at council a kind of inquiry that responds to that kind of refusal. That isn't an isolated incident, though. It has occurred across sectors and across communities. We've seen it in relation to public health at the Hamilton Board of Health and calls for structural changes there. We've, you know, Kojo wrote about it in relation to racism and the lack of anti-racism funding and initiatives. We've seen it in response to inadequate programming services, resourcing, or responses to what happened at Pride in a couple of years ago with the attacks on the 2S LGBT community. And we've seen it in the delays to how we took up the fact that you had yellow vesters and some white supremacist groups organizing and meeting regularly outside of City Hall. The delays there, the gaps, the lack of responsiveness are attached to poor listening. And you can't talk about building relationships when you begin time and time again with poor listening.
What I see with this mayor is there's a bunker mentality of, we don't like all the criticism. We don't feel like it's fair, or it feels personal, even though it really isn't. And so we're going to just shut it down, just stop listening, just stop taking the calls, stop taking the meetings, right? And that way it'll somehow go away and the election will roll around and we'll win by name recognition or whatever, habit voting. And then we've proven we didn't have to listen to all of those people, our critics, and let's plow on. I mean, Sarah, am I being a little too simplistic with my analysis?
No, I think you're right. I think that's where he's at. I think that's where a lot of, you know, for lack of better terminology, older, you know, white elected officials or ex-elected officials have their mindset. It's a numbers game. It's not about listening to constituents. It's like, if you can get elected either way. I think Bob Bertina said it in his op-ed, right? That he knows who not to listen to. And he means all of the dissenting voices, including ours. But we would be happy if they were, you know, building warming centers that were 24 hours. We would be so happy, we would celebrate if it was true that, you know, the police budget was being redirected even a tiny bit. We didn't even fully get to the point of asking for it's not like we're saying abolish the entire thing, because there's no room for that conversation right now ideologically. We're just saying, take some of the surplus of the money you haven't used, instead of putting it into equipment at the end of the year like you normally do, to get rid of it, and actually put it towards things that matter. If they were to do that, like, people would be celebrating a lot more, and we would be on side, but they just keep fighting even the bare minimum asks to support people and to help save lives, and leaving us hanging, right? I don't think they see that when they make the right steps, we will celebrate. We want to see a Hamilton that is responded to and working collectively. We want to see a Hamilton where people can rest and don't have to be outside living in their tents. And, there's a sense of peace here. That's not the case. It's becoming more polarizing, and nobody wants that. But instead of listening and figuring out creative solutions, people are constantly being villainized, right? And saying that they don't need to be listened to, without understanding that these issues are going to get worse. Some of these issues also exist because of previous failed decisions, right? So if houselessness was considered during the LRT debate, we wouldn't have mass evictions across an LRT line. But these conversations didn't happen, right? And I think there's a lot that could have been done if people were being approached proactively to influence decisions that needed to be made. But instead, we're responding with no capital, no money, and we're just on the ground trying to help where we can fill these gaps, and we're villainized for it. I think there's a lot of room to now begin to listen if they really are serious about making a change.
And you didn't just get villainized, you got arrested and charged, Sarah. So I want to talk about that and the dropping the charges, because, it's one thing to snarkily go after or to troll people who are trying to promote a more progressive city. It's quite another thing to put on your record and the records of the other Black and racialized youth, possibly for their lifetime if the charges aren't dropped, doing damage to them psychologically, professionally, personally. I mean, I think it's shameful. And so I just want you to sort of give an update if you can. I know you had some success with getting the ridiculous bail condition that you guys couldn't even go into parks, which made me insane. Where is that now? What is happening with drop the charges, and what can we all do to expedite this nightmare coming to an end?
So we had our bail hearing on the 10th. We're being represented by Dean Paquette, who's an amazing lawyer. We were able to get our bail conditions amended so that we're now allowed in parks for work purposes, but we have to be lawful and peaceful, which still kind of makes me nervous, because if an eviction is happening, it still kind of means we can't be anywhere near it, lest the police say that we're being unpeaceful, even for watching. So still have to figure that out, but folks are allowed to go in and deliver supplies now, which is good. Where we're at is we received disclosure. And so Thursday, some of us are going to go meet with the lawyer to see what evidence has been collected, and to sort of, sorry, I muted myself, begin the conversations of building a defense. We have phone banks lined up for the rest of the month, where we're going to be asking people to sign on and call the prosecutors, call the chief of police, and folks to say, hey, we really do want charges to be dropped, just so that it's not us. So keep an eye out for the phone banks being released by Surge Toronto. We had a press conference yesterday where the Ontario Federation of Labour, the National Council of Canadian Muslims, the HDLC, District Labour Council, and a bunch of other groups and individuals, including the housing critic, MPP Remu Burns-McGowan, all spoke about how serious these charges were and why they need to be dropped. Activists, this isn't just a Toronto Hamilton issue. Activists across Ontario and across Canada right now are feeling the same effects of being reprimanded and criminalized for being activists in a way that we haven't seen before. Like, this is new for me and new for a lot of people in Toronto as well. Folks are going through the same process of charges because of Trinity Bellwoods and Lamport, even though it was very clear who held the power and who had use of force that day at those teardowns as well. So we're all dealing with similar charges and going to court. It is worrisome. Like, I don't think people realize the effects that this has on our day to day. I worry about my future. I think a lot of us are worried about our futures. I also, not a lot of people know this, but I'm like a sole parent to a 15-year-old, right? My nephew. So I have other things to think about. But I make the decisions to be on the front line, and so do others, because it matters. So yeah, I hope the charges get dropped. These conversations are still happening. From the sounds of it, it seems like the chief of police has been trying to contact leaders in the Black community who spoke at HCCI's press conference a couple of months ago to create dialogue. But dialogue cannot be had unless the charges are dropped, and that's been made very clear. And so he's been reaching out, but I'm not sure where the prosecutors stand on the issue. I really do hope the charges get dropped, and I hope that people continue to show up and not be scared of the backlash that comes with activism, because we need to be able to put pressure on the front lines for this work to continue. And I think specific people were picked off to create fear in the larger community that if you continue to organize and if you go too far, we're just going to stop you from being able to organize entirely. And that's scary, because none of us are going to be doing this forever. And we would hope that the community would continue to like step in. But I worry that criminalization makes people afraid. And so, yeah.
Is there something we should be doing with the Police Services Board?
I think so. I think, the mayor has suggested to us that there's been a change in representation at the Hamilton Police Services Board, and more diversity there. If that's not tokenistic and superficial, then, I would think that some of those new members with new perspectives and potentially different analysis, if they have them, to be thinking very critically about this particular circumstance. As we've been talking about this, when poor listening fails and poor listening via poor leadership fails, what happens is conflict. And the way to respond to that isn't to further increase or escalate the conflict, which is what has happened here. Now, to lay charges in this instance is a result of very, very poor listening, and you're penalizing. It's kind of the extreme of poor listening, where you're actually actively antagonizing and attacking those who dissent. And the attacking of protesters is not unique, like Sarah said. It's happening across North America, but also in the States. And there are particular kinds of things that they could have responded to. And they've had a lengthy period to do so. Dropping the charges is the first part. I think this isn't a time where we need to silence more dissent. I think this is a time where we have to do more listening, because there's more at stake right now, where we're in the midst of a confluence of crises occurring simultaneously. And I think, listening to those who respond to those most affected first is what we should be doing right now. That's what you do in a crisis moment, actually, is look for those who respond to crises and do it well. And that's what could occur via, some mediator, or, and like I said, if there are new people at the Hamilton Police Services Board that are supposed to be diverse, then that is exactly where they should be intervening right now, is to suggest that actually we should be engaging some of these communities and community leaders to more adequately and responsibly respond to some of these needs. And the only way to start doing that is to get rid of some of these charges that are a result of poor listening and poor leadership.
Well, certainly Dr. Warner said that he had little hope for things getting better if the charges weren't dropped. So I think there's a wide consensus that that was a bad move. It was an overreach. It was an attempt at intimidation, and nobody supports that. But except for, and Sarah, maybe I can get you to just speak to this, every time that I've posted anything about what happened at J.C. Beamer and in front of the police station, the response to me is from some, Well, they stepped across the police tape. Therefore, it's free for all. Right? And my response has been, so if they moved across police tape, that justifies a knee on the neck and Roa feeling as though she was going to have what happened to her, happened to George Floyd, happened to her. Like, it goes from something like that to a knee on the neck. I don't think that would have happened to a white girl. I really don't. And so I know it's a tough question to ask, or maybe it's not for you at all. Is there racism beyond just not listening and poor leadership? Is there racism involved in all of this? I mean, it seems to be much, much worse for racialized people in Hamilton when it comes to how the police respond. I might get, a nasty email, but, you guys are going through so much worse. So do you think that there is racism in the Hamilton police? And do you think that there's going to be any real efforts to change that from the existing administration of the city?
Get those responses as well, because I have been getting them a lot. I refer people back to the demonstration in front of Premier Ford's home, like maybe 2 weeks after the Beamer incidents, where police set up a barricade akin to a police safe line, and a person crossed it who was not Black, and she was given a verbal warning and was reprimanded verbally and then let go. And so what is it about us that when Canterbury residents are on this other side of the tape asking us for help and we say we're just going to go talk to them, what is it about us that warrants 40, 50 officers, however many were there, coming at us when we're simply there to support? And we were there since 6 a.m. So it was a long day, emotions were high, but no matter how you look at it, like, we weren't a threat. Our emotions were just high. You have to remember that some people on our team have lived in shelters, like, including myself. Some people like have family members who have lived in tents. So we're not out here just because we feel some sort of righteousness. It's painful, right? And so I do think there is racism. I do think the police have a lot to work through. And you could tell that they were visibly upset that day at us. They weren't upset at what was going on. It was a different energy than from city staff, who didn't seem to have anything against us at the time and who were just there doing their job. Yeah, and the last thing I'll say to that is, we do get death threats. I've received like really terrible messages on social media, over email. I don't talk about it a lot because it's like not easy to talk about. And I know this is stuff that elected people deal with, but people have to remember that some of us, like, we're not elected. We're just people trying to do the right thing. And since the road painting, since that peaceful demonstration, I think, yeah, there's a lot to say about people's reaction to us being upset and using that to like threaten lives or to say that we deserve violence or deserve to be dead. And I know that you've seen some of that on social media yourself, like how terrible people can be. But yeah, it's causing some of us to actually be sick in different ways. And so we really, really would like to see the conversations move past our individual actions that day and toward what needs to change so that we go back to fostering a community of like care and love, and to be able to see our actions in terms of like trying to care for folks in tents as like one of love and one rooted in like wanting to make Hamilton a better place, simply put. And it's not always being read that way, and I'm not sure why. But that's what it is. It's like, I don't care about potholes being built or filled in. Like, I know retail politics is a thing, but we're not elected, and that is not our role. We're not trying to keep a constituency. What we are trying to do is care for those who are the most vulnerable, and we do that from a place of love and care. And all we're asking for is to see that reflected back from people who have actual power, actual money, actual responsibility. And that will make the biggest difference. And I will be the first person to applaud that. And some people are trying to do that in those spaces, but we need to stop being met with this like vitriolic, you are the bad guys, you guys cross the tape, and ask ourselves what we need to do together to continue to create a community that loves everyone, that doesn't stand for people being told to go live in the woods. Like, and that conversation keeps being lost. And maybe sometimes we won't react in the ways that everyone expects, but after a couple of years of doing this, like, it does get to you, and you think, okay, well, what else can I do? I don't have any more money, I don't have supplies right now, but I have my 2 feet and I have my friends, and maybe together, if we just keep walking, something will change. And that didn't happen. But I think if community were to come together and continue to say, you know what, we're going to move from a place of love and understanding, I do think Hamilton can change.
Wow. Sarah, I don't know what to say to that other than it was beautiful, because I know you're a beautiful person and you're doing this for the sake of others. The fact that you're getting death threats, that's just beyond unacceptable. It's criminal, and it has to stop. I mean, come on, Hamilton, this is insane. If you were an elected official, those threats would be taken differently and you'd have protection and all kinds of resources, right? But instead, you're left to take that kind of incoming, probably with very little resources. And so, Sarah, I just want to put it right on the record that that shit has to stop. And who's ever doing it, stop. You're affecting real people, their real mental health, their real quality of life, and their families. Ameil, final thoughts on today's show? We've covered a lot of painful topics, to Sarah's point. Anything that you want to leave to sort of wrap up our discussion?
I think, everyone watching this show should rewind a bit and listen to what Sarah said and listen to it carefully. That's the last thing I want to say.
I agree 1,000,000%. Thank you both. I can't imagine how painful it is from your perspectives to have to talk about this stuff, to educate the rest of us who are, I'll say first foremost, I'm clueless about all of what you go through with systemic racism and with being on the front lines. But thank you for not just the work that you do, but also for being the voices that people trust on the issues that if they don't care about already, they need to care about, because we need to care about each other. That's what I'm taking away loud and clear from today's OShow. Please, both of you, be safe, and thank you for being on the show.